So, welcome to the Ashes to Diamond podcast, and we're all about creating beautiful memories. Today, I'm so delighted I've got the wonderful Kelly Judkins from Harding's Funeral in Hawera joining me. Now, Kelly is born and bred in South Taranaki. She is well known in the community that she calls home, and this has been strengthened by serving in various organisations such as Victim Support, Local Council, a Marriage Celebrant, and a Justice of the Peace. So currently in her 30th year of funeral service, Kelly has qualified in both disciplines of embalming and funeral directing. She has served on the executive of the New Zealand Embalmers Association and held office on the editorial board for the industry magazine. So Kelly, welcome. Wow, what a background.
Oh, it's certainly been an active 30 years. How's that?
That's one way of putting it. Wow,
Absolutely.
that's impressive. So can you tell me about your journey into the funeral industry and what drew you to this profession?
It was a really interesting one. I grew up in Hawera, which is a small town, and I come from a dairy farming background. So my background as a young teenager and in my 20s, I was doing locum milkings, and so I did relief milking for farmers. I worked in a shearing gang and basically did catering and fish and chip shop stuff and that sort of thing. It was really, good work, good, honest work, but I didn't hold any particular skill. So one day I was sat down by my mother and father and told to get an actual job, an adult job, and would I like to do that? So I went into Ministry for Social Development, and they gave me a number of courses to look at, and they did that back in those days to upskill people, and I did that, and they said, oh, you'd be really good at this, and by joking they just gave me an embalming course to have a look at. I had a look at it. I was told at that time by an older funeral director that women didn't make very good undertakers, and so the challenge was then accepted, of course, and 30 years later, here I am. So,
Wow.
and we just worked through obtaining both disciplines and getting good experience in them and qualifying in both as well, which was really important to me.
That's amazing because you're right. It wasn't an industry that was taken up a lot by women back then.
No. At the time that I joined the funeral industry 30 years ago, we had two other women in Taranaki who were female funeral directors. So I made number 3. I was the first in South Taranaki to become an embalmer funeral director. Excuse me. So there weren't many at that time, but now I think women make up probably a good 50 to 55% of the workforce now.
Wow. Yeah, because in my experience, I know a lot of women doing funeral directing, and I think they're more compassionate or something.
I think both genders bring a lot to the table, and I think there's room for women just as there is room for men in this industry. And I think that for different people, we have different comfort levels, different boundaries, different triggers, different everything. And so we resonate with different people. So it's really good for a company to hold different diversity of people in the workforce so that they can relate to their community really well.
And I think you're right. That's really important in your industry because you when people pass, it doesn't discriminate, does it?
No, our graves will always be the same size regardless of our bank account. So keeps you humble.
Yes, dead right. So with 30 years experience in the funeral service, obviously you must have encountered some various situations and emotions. So how do you approach each family's needs and provide personalised services?
That's how do I do that? And it's about being really accepting of who each family actually are in the first place and being willing to work with a variety of different people with different temperaments, different moral compasses, different ethos to life and death, and then looking at that, combine it with whether or not they have a Christian faith or a secular faith, and then just really be willing to help them throughout the funeral process, whatever that may be, and navigating it so that in 10 years' time, when they look back and say, man, that was such a good funeral for mum, that is when I've done my job.
That's brilliant, because it's such an emotional time for people when they've lost a loved one.
Oh, that's it. And you've got to play the long game for this, and you've got to think really into the future. And so when you are memorable by a decade of creating an event family can be proud of, and actually not lead it but empower the family to do that, that's amazing.
And because you don't get a dress rehearsal at this.
No, you don't. Just death is like life. There's no dress rehearsal. You're straight into it.
Oh, that's amazing. So you also have been actively involved in your community through various organisations. So how do you think this community engagement has influenced your work as a funeral director?
I think it's made me really open to my community. And I mean, the fact is I was born and bred here. So there's generations of knowledge that I have. And I think that's really valuable when I walk into a tense situation and know the dynamics that are happening, and I can hold more empathy for that family. I think that the length of time that I've been in service, I know how to take things a bit more slowly or take them a bit more quickly, and how to navigate those. But just being involved in your community to the level that I have been, it's been really important to me. I'd also spent time on the local community board and council, and that would be going back 15 years or so, and just having a wide range of involvement with a variety of people. You get to know people, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. And I think that's it in anything, isn't it? People get to know, like, and trust you.
100%. And you've got to be trustworthy and transparent when you're doing business. So that's a big part.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So could you share with us a significant moment or experience that you felt had a profound impact on your role as a funeral director?
There's so many different ones. I think, and it's an interesting career, and I've got staff who are with me now working alongside me. A couple of them have been in with me they're coming into their 6th year of funeral service, and I've got one staff member who's in her 1st year of training. So we always tell them there are going to be moments in your career that define that particular part, and there will always be those things. And it might be something as significant as letting a balloon go at very poignant moment. It might be the fact that we've done somebody's hair. It might be something that someone has said in a funeral arrangement. But the small town funeral director can't ignore there are always going to be watershed moments throughout their career. So it's a really special place to be, and it's one of the most intimate times in a person's life, and we get to be a part of that. So I don't know that there's as many poignant particular moments as just a wealth of everything.
And it makes you who you are.
Tired.
So as a qualified embalmer and funeral director, do you think you could shed some light on the importance of these roles in the funeral process and how it contributes to the overall experience for the grieving families?
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, hey, because as a fellow funeral celebrant too, Cara, you would see a growing movement of people who say, just put me in a box and send me to the crematorium, I don't want a funeral. And that is them saying it, but they're not realising the value of a funeral and what it can give people. What it can give is really a gift from the deceased person, that you give your family a healthy start to a healthy grieving pattern. And that's the platform in which a community comes together and pays tribute to a loved one. How special is that? And, with the media saying that they're expensive, funerals, take it back to basics. If ladies bring a plate or men bring a plate, whatever, get back to grassroots of what actually saying farewell means, and what a simple funeral service could be, but include family in it. Because when you say hello to someone, is important as saying goodbye. So I think that's really important with embalming and where that interconnects into the funeral process. I believe it's important to have saying goodbye to someone is important. So having a person's body there is important. So embalming gives us that ability to retain somebody's dignity for the duration of a funeral and allow us to say goodbye in a really nice, unhurried way. So you don't get one without the other, because really if you don't have a body at a funeral, it's a memorial service. So it's views and horses for courses, and we can argue different points, but I guess that's what my opinion is, as humble as it may be.
And actually on that, you're quite right. Occasionally and you probably would hear it more, but occasionally I hear people say, I don't want to have a funeral service. But I think it's really important for those that are left behind. It helps to give them closure, I think. What are your views?
I think it helps them open a door. And so if you look at it, a funeral is the beginning of a grieving process. So if it's a formal opening to a community saying, let me support you, how wonderful is that? And it's back in the days when you could, I don't know, go across the street to your neighbour and borrow a cup of sugar. And once upon a time you did that, and then in turn, that person would make a cake and bring that to your husband's funeral. Those sorts of things are important, and I think we're losing our sense of community at the moment, and it would be wonderful to get that back, because I think if we have our good sense of community, we'll have a good sense of what a funeral might look like for our dead.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because I think, dare I bring it up, but COVID, I think that actually did help to start bringing back community. It's certainly something I observed around my neighbourhood. People actually spoke to each other.
It did, and yet there's a paradox in that there are more people opting for a direct cremation or no funeral service because of going through that COVID. And so sadly we're sitting in a real state of flux, and really with no determination of what our society might look like at the moment.
Okay, yeah, it certainly did change the landscape in a lot of areas, that's for sure.
Yeah, us huggers, we're not okay.
Oh dear. Now, in June 2019, yourself and your husband became the proud owners of Harding's Funerals. And obviously this was fulfilling your dream of a locally owned and operated funeral home. So how has this ownership impacted on your approach to serving the community?
Oh, and it went from what I thought was 24/7 to a real 24/7. And so Sean and I live and breathe funeral service, and we are available to anyone that wants to talk to us for whatever reason, whether it's advice about a headstone, whether it's advice about what to do with someone's ashes after they've been cremated, right down to maybe something horrible's happened and they need help at that time. It means that we're holding a business open that has been in existence for 3 generations of the Harding family, 110 years, and I'm the first outsider to own that. So there's a huge amount of history, a huge amount of responsibility, a service to the public that should never be ignored, and just the fact that we love what we do in between it all is a real bonus.
Yeah, that's amazing. It is important. It's nothing more guaranteed. Yeah. So obviously every community has its unique culture and traditions. So how do you ensure that the services you provide align with the specific needs and beliefs of the families you work with?
So training's a massive part of what we do, and being qualified was really important to me when I undertook my qualifications. So at the moment, we've got both Brittany and Geordie who are going through their qualifications in funeral service. And it's not just about the mechanical side of a funeral. Our qualifications do encompass learning about different cultures and being able to appreciate what values those particular cultures hold in the funeral process. So it's really important to us to at least have an understanding. Alongside that, really good communication skill, so that if we're not sure, we know to ask and make sure that we can abide by what they're after. And that's a really important thing to us as well.
Yeah. Now, you're a marriage celebrant and a justice of the peace, so you certainly have a diverse range of experiences. So how do these roles complement your work in the funeral industry?
I think when I became a marriage celebrant, that was after I'd become a justice of the peace. Justice of the peace was in recognition, and it should be noted here, a JP is an actual service that's taken by a person who has been given that title by the Ministry of Justice, and they undertake service to the public and ministerial duties. So that was, and because they're dedicated people in the community, that's where that was recognised, that I have an interest in serving my community. So I did that. And people used to get a little bit tied up between, if I was a JP, then surely I could do a wedding ceremony for them. And I got asked a number of times and thought, no, I'll respond to that need now, and became a marriage celebrant, and that made life really busy. But what an awesome way to serve people in both really important aspects, weddings and funerals, but also having that really good sense of ceremony impacted on both my weddings and my funerals. So we were able to see what was important, and that was a really cool thing.
Because weddings are certainly a special thing to be able to do as
so
well.
Good. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, like you were saying a little bit earlier, the funeral or service industry has certainly evolved over the years. So what changes have you noticed during your career, and how do you adapt to those changes to provide the best service possible?
When I first started, people would bring a plate to a funeral, so we didn't purchase catering. When I first started, the flowers that were brought to a funeral were posies that were picked from somebody's garden. Now, it was so nice. You never had photo presentations, and you didn't have those sorts of things. And the majority of funerals were held in churches, regardless of how many times that person had entered that church. It was pretty much a known thing that's where you had a funeral service. Over the years, it's evolved to now we purchase catering. Sometimes they have a drinks cart going around, or whatever. There are donations, so, to a honourable cause. So if somebody has died from cancer, donations to Cancer Society or the hospice and so on. Funerals can be held anywhere, and I think that's actually a really important thing to remember. We don't have to have it in a church. We don't have to have it, in a funeral chapel. We can have it on a beach. We can have it in a wool shed. We can have it in a cow shed. We can have it in a bowling club. We can have it at a sporting event centre. All of those venues are really available to our community. They're probably more appropriate in a lot of ways. And we can do that. And in fact, everywhere I've mentioned, we've had a funeral. So we've had them on cliff tops overlooking beaches, which was so beautiful. Hay bales as seats, really rustic and really reflective of that person. How cool is that?
That's really cool.
Yeah. And so for me, I think what has come to light now is a willingness to provide bespoke funerals is really important, that really do reflect the person who has died. So cookie cutter funerals, I would say, they happen every day. They have no real thought go into them. But a bespoke funeral, we really do look at that person and say, what made them them? Now let's look at the whole picture. What can we do to make a beautiful funeral happen?
Oh, that's lovely, because you're right, because obviously when people are in times of stress and that sort of thing, they aren't aware of what they can do, and there's no rules now from what I'm hearing from you. If it's important to the family.
if it's important to the family, we do it. And, as long as it's morally and ethically and legally sound, we can do it. And, we've had some really cool funerals. And like Brittany and Geordie have hand-fed wild deer at the house of a gentleman right out the back of Stratford. But because they were willing to take that person home and go and check on him, they would never have had that really special experience had they not been willing to do things the family's way.
Yeah, and it's education both ways, isn't it?
100%. So they managed to feed a deer out the window of the house of this gentleman, and it was a deer who had been raised or had been born wild, but just came to the house looking for breakfast most mornings, and would be fed by the gentleman who had died and had lived in that house. And how cool! I was so envious of that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue for my next question there. So have you got a heartwarming or inspiring story from your own career that reflects the impact of your work on families during their difficult times?
Oh, there's so many. So many. I wouldn't want to pull one out of the hat. But I think it's just they're all heartwarming in their own unique ways, and it's because we go that extra length to make each funeral unique to that family, and each one has its own unique set of circumstances. So for that reason alone, they're all heartwarming when we get to the end and we go, oh man, that was so cool. I want to do another one like that. But you never will, because we do each funeral as differently as each person who comes along is.
Yeah, I like that, reflecting the uniqueness.
Yeah.
So obviously in your role, grief and support is an essential aspect within the funeral service. So how do you and your team provide ongoing support to families after the funeral is over?
Being in a small town, it's good because we can adapt now. There will always be a person that crosses the road when they see us, because we might just be a little bit too soon and too much for them after a funeral, and they don't want to talk to us. But our doors are always open. We've got a good coffee machine. We've got water and good quality tea. If someone wants to call in and see us, they're more than welcome. We also have a really good knowledge base of any support services should the occasion require it. And so if someone does express that they need help with a grief process, then particularly we can put them into touch with actual professionals that will be able to help, So we don't recognise that we're those people. We would prefer to put them into the services of a qualified professional. So we don't run a bereavement support group as such, but I think it's really important to note that we keep in touch with our families for a long time after the funeral.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And so what advice would you give to someone considering a career in the funeral service, especially obviously with your level of experience and dedication to the profession?
What do I want to see? I want to see somebody that has empathy, but they also have common sense, and they don't come into this industry too early. You've got to be at least 20 before you go on the course in New Zealand, and that's for both funeral service and embalming. And you must have spent a year in the funeral industry before you go on that course. So it's the only course in New Zealand that requires you to have work experience before you go on the course. What do you need? If you're a school-aged person saying, oh, I really want to do this, go study your biology and your chemistry and your science and your English. And then maybe if you're really keen, go and maybe get a nursing background or something along those lines. Do a couple of years in a different world where you need to look after the living first. If you're older and you think that you want to be part of the profession, you've obviously got a lot of life experience to give. Make sure that you're fit and you're able to lift and you're able to perform duties that require a good physical capability. So yeah, it's probably really all it is, because again, diversity is where it's at.
Mm. And like you said earlier on, we all attract different people. So and it's important.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for sharing, Kelly. This has been awesome. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
I don't know. I can tell you a little story about Henry. And Henry's a mini schnauzer that we've had for a year now in funeral service. So he's only a baby. He's still learning. But when we first got him, we'd only had him for maybe 3 weeks. And we had a gentleman come in to arrange his wife's funeral. And he was of a really awesome age. And so was his wife. Anyway, when you get to awesome age and you level up to level 99, you sometimes need extra PlayStation bits like glasses and hearing aids. He had forgotten his, and so his daughter and son were taking charge of the conversation with the funeral director. And anyway, he was sort of a bit left out. So Brittany took him Henry, who was only a little puppy at the time, and plopped him on this man's lap and said, here you go, you can play fetch with him because he'll bring this back, meaning one of his toys. So they played fetch for about 10 minutes, and then they were both really tired. So they had to sleep for another 10 minutes. So, and it was just one of those really cool little stories. I've always thought it was so lovely and warm and just wonderful. So yeah, we've got a little dog called Henry that comes into work most days too. So yeah.
Oh, that's super. And what a great icebreaker as well for people.
Oh, we have people come in and, oh, this is Henry. I've been waiting to see him. So sometimes he's more popular than we are.
Star of the show.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Hey, Kelly, that's been awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. And what I will do is put your contact details in the show notes. So if anyone wants to work with you or discuss anything further, then if you're happy, they can reach out.
Thank you so much, Cara. And no, thank you for the opportunity. It's been really wonderful.
You're welcome.